So this is section 3.7, solving equations involving any absolute values. Okay, so we've talked about absolute values before, where an absolute value is basically the distance away from 0 on a number line. So if I had like the absolute value of 4, my options that I could get out would be 4. Now, I could also put a negative 4 inside those absolute values and still get a positive 4 out. Okay, the reason that works is because both negative 4 and 4 are both 4 spaces away from 0 on a number line, so both of those, if we take the absolute value of those, they're going to kick out a 4. So anytime you have an absolute value, it should always kick out a positive answer. So here what we're going to do is we're going to kind of work that in reverse. They tell us what they kick out, so we've got absolute value of A is equal to 4, so we're going to kick out a 4 just like we did here. So our two options that could be inside of those absolute values would be a positive 4 and a negative 4. Okay, so when we solve each of these equations, typically they have two different answers. Okay, so if I cover up, so I've got absolute value of d minus 4 is equal to 3. So if I cover up the inside here of d minus 4, basically it's kind of thinking, okay, I got an absolute value, I got a question mark inside of there, and I kick out a 3. So if we think about it, what two values could be inside of there that would kick out us a 3? Well, the question mark could be a positive 3, or it could be a negative 3, because if we put both of those values in there, they'd kick out a positive 3. So now we've got a little bit more to it because we've got d minus 4 in there. So what we can do is we can set up two separate equations. So we can go d minus 4 is equal to the negative 3. Then we can also do an equation that's d minus 4 is equal to the positive 3, because either of those could really be inside of there and still give us our answer. So if we solve this out here to get rid of subtracting by 4, we add 4 to each side. So that would be d is equal to 1. And then over here, same thing, add 4 to each side. So d would be equal to 7. Okay, now both of these are going to be true and both of these are going to be answers, because if we plug back in here, absolute value of 1 minus 4 is equal to 3. Well, that would be absolute value of negative 3 is equal to 3. And we know the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. So 3 equals 3. It checks out. Okay? Now you can do the same thing with the other one and plug in the 7 and see if that works. So absolute value 7 minus 4 is equal to 3. Well, we know 7 minus 4 is 3. So absolute value of 3 is equal to 3. Absolute value of 3 is 3. So 3 equals 3. Okay, so you should get two answers for the vast majority of these. Okay, so same thing with B. So we cover up the inside and think, okay, I'm going to take the absolute value of something and kick out a 7. So my two options here for inside this, inside kind of thinking of like a box, would be either a positive 7 or a negative 7, and either way that would kick me out a positive 7 for my answer. So I'm going to go x plus 3 is equal to a negative 7, and x plus 3 is equal to a positive 7. Then I solve both of those out, so I'm going to go and subtract 3 from each side to get rid of adding 3, because a positive 3 and a negative 3 cancels out. So it would be x is equal to negative 7 minus 3 would be negative 10. So that's one of my answers. And then same thing over here, to get rid of adding 3, I do the opposite, so I subtract 3 from each side. So that would be x is equal to 4. So my two answers there would be 4 and negative 10. And again, if I plug those back in, just like I did up here, it should come out with 7. Okay, so the next thing is going to be you guys trying some. So on page 129, try out A and B, and then I'll get your answer here. So for A, for their two answers, they got C is equal to 2. C is equal to 6. And then for B, they got H is equal to negative 11. And H is equal to 1. So hopefully you got those. Okay, so these next ones here, example 2 is going to get a little bit more intense. Just basically there's just one extra step we have to do. So to be able to figure out what the two numbers we're going to come up with, like the positive version and the negative version, we have to be down to just where its absolute value equals a number, okay? Because before when we did these, it was just absolute value of something equals a number. There was nothing else added or subtracted outside of that absolute value. Now here, we've got stuff outside of our absolute value besides the equals a number. So we've got -2. Okay, so we want to take care of that before we do our splitting into the two equations, because the splitting into the two equations basically takes care of that absolute value. So before we can do that, we have to take care of this -2. So what I'm going to do to get rid of subtract 2 is I'm going to add 2 to each side. So then I'll have absolute value of g plus 3 is equal to, and then that goes away, so then 6 plus 2 is 8. Okay, so now I've got it down to just absolute value of something is equal to a number. So now this is where I can take and split into my two separate equations. One of them equaling a -8, one of them equaling a +8. So I can go g plus 3 is equal to a -8, g plus 3 is equal to a +8. Then I solve both of those out, so to get rid of adding 3, I'm going to subtract 3 from each side. So g would be equal to -11 as one of my answers. And then I'm going to subtract 3 from each side here. So that would be g is equal to 5. So my two answers would be 5 and -11. And again, you could plug back in and get the same thing on both sides. Okay, so you can always double check these to see if you're correct. Okay, try another one like that. So we've got absolute value of x minus 4 plus 5 is equal to 10. Okay, so same situation. We've got to get the absolute value by itself first. So this plus 5 is kind of in the way of that. So to get rid of adding 5, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to subtract 5 from each side, because then the +5 and -5 cancel out. So I'll have absolute value of x minus 4 is equal to 10 minus 5 is 5. Now that I've got it down to just absolute value equals a number, now I can split it into my two separate equations, one of them equaling a -5, one of them equaling a +5. So I can go x minus 4 is equal to a -5, x minus 4 is equal to a +5. So to get rid of subtracting by 4, I'm going to have to add 4 to each side. So that goes away, so x will equal a -1. One of my answers. And then same thing over here, to get rid of subtract 4, I'm going to have to add 4 to each side. So then I'll have x is equal to 9. So -1 and 9. Okay, so on page 129, try out C and D, and I'll get you your answers. So for C, they got m is equal to -27, and m is equal to 17. And then for D, they got D is equal to -3, and D is equal to 19. Okay, so make sure you solve out everything you can outside of the absolute value. Then when you get to that point, when it's down to just absolute value, then you split it into your two equations, a positive and a negative. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about here is empty set or no solutions to a set. So basically, empty set is a solution set with no members or no solutions. So if for some reason we can't come up with an answer, what we do is we put a 0 with a slash through it, or curly brackets that are empty. Okay, so either one of those means empty set, and basically there's no possible answer. Okay, so let's work through these next ones here. So we've got example 3, we've got absolute value of x minus 15 is equal to -4. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to try to get that absolute value by itself. So I'm going to have to get rid of the stuff on the outside. So I'm going to have to get rid of minus 15. So I'm going to add 15 to both sides. So then I'll have absolute value of x is equal to -4 plus 15 would be 11. So then from here, to get rid of my absolute values, I break it into my two equations. So I'll have x is equal to a -11, and x is equal to a +11, And then what's actually convenient about this one is I don't even have to solve any further because I didn't have anything in there like a +5 or anything like that inside those absolute values. So those would just be my two answers. Okay, I wouldn't even have to go any further than that. Okay, and then B here, I'm going to get the absolute value by itself. So I got absolute value of y plus 5, and then minus 2 is equal to -7. So I'm going to start by getting rid of subtract 2. I'm going to add 2 to each side. So I have absolute value of y plus 5 is equal to, and then -7 plus 2 would be -5. Now when I'm thinking about my two numbers here, if I think about it, we talked about this before, if I have absolute value of something, can I ever kick out a -5? Well, no, because when we do absolute values, it's distance. Well, we can never have a negative distance. You can never drive a negative amount of miles. So since our distance can never be negative, this is actually going to be empty set here. So y is equal to empty set, and we know that because we can never have just an absolute value equaling a negative. If you have that, it can't come out nice. Okay, so you can never have it just absolute value equals a negative like that, negative anything. It could be -50, it could be -1. Anything that's negative equals absolute value, it's got to be an empty set, okay, because there's no solution to that. Okay, on page 130, try out E and F. I'll get you your answers. So for E, they got S is equal to empty set, so there's no solutions for that one. And then for F, they got W is equal to -12, and W is equal to 12. Okay, so those would be your two answers there. Okay, so we got one more example here. Example 4 is going to be on page 130, so I'll read it to you. So on page 130 it says hydrogen can exist as a solid, liquid, or gas. For hydrogen to be a liquid, its temperature must be within 2 degrees of -257 degrees Celsius. Write and solve an equation that can be used to find the least and greatest temperatures at which hydrogen is a liquid. Okay, so basically we can be 2 degrees above -257, and we can be 2 degrees below. Okay, so how we set this up here is we go, okay, I gotta have my absolute values here, and I know I want the difference of those values to be 2. Okay, because when I subtract those two values, I want the difference to be 2 away, so either 2 above or 2 below. Okay, so that's going to go outside my absolute values on the other side of the equals. Okay, now I've got my temperature, T, and I want the difference of that, difference means subtract, and then the difference of that with my 257 as a negative. Okay, so that's kind of the setup there. So our distance we want away on each side goes off to this side, and then our starting number goes inside those absolute values. Okay, well now if I've got subtracting by a negative, I know that's the same as plus a positive. So I've got absolute value equals a number, so I can split it up into my two equations, where I'll have T plus 257 is equal to a -2, and T plus 257 is equal to a +2. Then I solve out for both of those sides. So to get rid of plus 257, I'm going to subtract 257 from each side. Oops. So when I do that, I would have T is equal to -259. And then over here, subtract 257 from each side. So T would be equal to -255. Okay, so those would be my two answers here, which this one here would be 2 below, this one here would be 2 above. So we're basically 2 below or 2 above, and anywhere in between those would be acceptable answers. Okay, so that would be our two answers there. Okay, so for homework you guys have page 131, 12 to 34 even.